You've reached Hotel Pacifico, your 5-star destination for BC politicos. Press 4 for room service. Press the star key for your hosts Mike McDonald and Kate Hammer.
We were just actually reflecting, Mike and I, how this actually was when we were conceiving of the pod, our first choice to invite our first guest to the Hotel Pacifico, NDP strategist Bob Dewar. We're going to check in with Bob today about how he helped John Horgan end a 16-year drought for the NDP and make him the first BC NDP premier ever to win re-election, and what he thinks are the important lessons for David Eby from that.
And then once we kick Bob out of the hotel, we're going to head down to the strategy suite with Geoff Meggs, where we'll talk about the province's clamp down on short-term housing, where what it will mean for the political agenda and the housing agenda going forward, and whether there's anything that can trip up Premier Eby and the NDP government in the next year, as we're 12 months away from a provincial election. And then we'll end the show today at the mini bar, where we'll either raise a glass or take a shot. So on that note, I'm excited to welcome Bob Dewar to the pod today. As Kate says, Bob's a very successful NDP strategist, not just in British Columbia, but led campaigns in Manitoba. And Bob's very mysterious, so there's no detailed resume online that you can find. But I'm betting that Bob has elected more NDPers across Canada than practically anyone alive or dead. So Bob, welcome to our inaugural episode today.
Welcome, Bob.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Mike. I'm so pleased to be here with your inaugural one and all those nice words about me. So that's terrific. Where do you want to start?
Well, I wanted to start actually with just a quick reflection that when I was doing research and preparation for this conversation today, I did notice that there isn't a ton written there about you and about your history, as a longtime history as a strategist. And I was wondering if that was on purpose. Are you the classic behind the scenes guy?
I always think the politicians should get all the credit because they're the ones putting themselves out there. It's not me. I give them advice, but they're the ones that have to do that. So yes, it's not about me. It's about them, and it's about getting people elected.
Well, I'm sorry, Bob, but today is going to be about you. If you bear with us for a bit. Because one of the things I wanted to start with too, Bob, is it always occurs to me, I'm always interested in how people get into politics, particularly the strategy side. It's definitely not on the option sheet they hand you in high school guidance. So can you give us a bit of a sense of how you got started that, and then maybe tell us a little bit too about how you ended up in BC?
Yeah, it's ever since I was a kid, I was interested in politics. A friend of mine lived up the street, and his aunt worked for Lester Pearson, and I was about 11 or 12, and I went to see, I'm going to give my age out here, the famous Walter Gordon budget in the mid-60s, which was one of the most progressive budgets that Canada's ever seen. And I went up there, and I actually met the Prime Minister. I met him through this woman I knew, and I got the bug at 11 or 12. Didn't know what I wanted to do with it, but I got the bug. Then I became a teenager, and you sort of forget about that. Although I always followed politics and started canvassing when I was in my late teens for local NDP candidates in Ottawa. I'm from Ottawa originally. And then my mother was in politics. And when I was 26 years old, she was going to run for mayor, and she came to me and said, and I'd worked in a couple of campaigns. She said, "I'd like you to run my campaign." And I said, remember being in your 20s, you can do everything, And so I said, sure. And I knew nothing, compared to what I know today. And I went and just did it. She got elected. And that was my start into sort of electoral politics, being in an organization position. From then I, went through school, and I did different campaigns. And in 1983, I moved out to Manitoba to work in the new Poly government, and worked for them, and worked for the party out here, worked in numerous elections across the country. I actually worked in my first election in BC in 1986, running the Dewdney campaign, where I had two candidates.
Oh my goodness, that's where I was. I was in Dewdney.
Were you?
Yes, I was.
Oh.
I was only getting 3% of the vote, though.
Well, yeah.
You did better.
Yeah. Yeah, but we didn't win. And it was very bizarre having two candidates in there. So that and then in Manitoba, when Gary Dewar became premier, he asked me to run his election in 1999, which I'd done. I'd run previous elections. So I did that, became chief of staff, and then ran his 2003 election where he got reelected, and helped him ever since until he went off to be the ambassador to the United States. And worked on the Greg Selinger campaign, but just on giving advice to then campaign manager Michael Balagas, and took a break from that and went into the union movement. Took a break from that after about 10 years, and started put out my shingle to do consulting. I was thinking of going into retirement and do some consulting, and I was working for unions, doing some little political advice here and there. And I got a call one day from John Horgan in February of 2016, asking me would I like to come out and meet him and run his campaign. And so
at that point, Bob, in February 2016, I mean, there was probably maybe even a sense of invincibility about Christy Clark at that time. I mean, the economy was strong. She'd come off a big win in 2013. How did you size it up when you came out and talked to Mr. Horgan?
Well, first of all, I didn't know him from Adam. I'd never met the man, and I still remember meeting him and thinking, this guy's got the royal jelly. He knows how to talk to people. He's like normal, when he talked to people, and he could engage. But there was this whole thing, and back up here, I went to after I agreed to work for John, I went to the federal convention, which was in Edmonton, a federal NDP convention, and I went to the BC caucus to talk to all the delegates there, and I couldn't get over it, how people were just didn't think they could win. It's just like, you want to come out here and help us, good luck, and there was just this whole perception of Christy could not be beaten, that the economy was strong, she's a great communicator, great politician, and that it would be very difficult to beat. This is what people were telling me. So then, and talking to John, he was, somewhat, I don't know if I can beat her. She's really strong. They have so much money. We have nothing, yada, yada, yada. And so then I came out and talked to people out there, and there was a real hangover from the 2013 campaign. People, when I would talk to them, said, I don't really want to talk about that. It's just, you're triggering me from what happened. And you folks out there know what happened is that everybody thought the NDP was going to win. And then surprise, surprise, election night, the results came out and the Liberals won an overwhelming majority. So that was still in the background with people.
So,
and
so you were dealing with the psychology of the situation. So so that's a bit of a turnaround right there in terms of how did you approach that motivationally with only just over a year to go until the next election by the time you showed up?
What I did is I came out and had big ears and listened to people and what they said and what was going on. And when you talk to people in both the civil society and people involved with the party, it was getting different points of view. And there was a whole thinking there that people were not being listened to on the political agenda. And how do we deal with that? How do we deal with that and with policy, et cetera? And how do we deal with that going into the election that was going to be a year away? And what I said to people is that, and folks wanted to talk about the fact that, well, the Liberals are corrupt and they're doing this and they're doing that. And I always tell people in politics, people are not corrupt. I mean, there are, don't get me wrong. I suppose there are some people that are in it for the wrong reasons, but most people who are serving there are doing it for the right reasons. They might have a point of view that you disagree with, but I told people it's about choices. It's about the choices you make as a political party. We're going to make a choice. They made a choice. We disagree with their choice. Here's our choice. And so that's what I wanted to get at people's heads, is that we're going to have a discussion with the voters of British Columbia on the choices we want to make versus the choices that they've made, and go after the record. And that went a long way to talk to people about how we conduct politics.
Well, and what you did in deciding what that conversation would be was actually quite bold. And I want to name two reasons why I see it that way. I think one is, you are, appreciating you spent this year kind of listening on the ground, but you are coming in from Manitoba to a new province and giving advice on sort of where the party can lean into affordability. And then I think the two of the plays you did on affordability, namely the bridge tolls and childcare, are ones that I'm assuming you had a lot of advice were no go or not going to be successful and would alienate a lot of people.
Yeah, two great points there. The first one on childcare is what we did is there was a childcare advocacy group going on for years, and they had a plan. And instead of reinventing the wheel, we grabbed the plan and said, we're going to implement this plan. And the plan was $10 a day daycare or childcare. And we did it. We said it, and people forget this, but we said we do it over 10 years in it, because there was the public, there was so many private players in the childcare field. And I came from a province where most of it was public. And to try and get the two to work together was very difficult. So that's why we said it over 10 years, but to give people hope that there would be childcare there and that to show progress on that. And then the second one was on the tolls, and the tolls there were two tolls. And I was gobsmacked by the fact that there were only two tolls, and why were there two tolls in these two regions and nobody else had tolls? Like, what was the reason for that? Mm-hmm. And nobody could give me an answer other than the financing for it. And why were these people being punished to have to pay tolls when everybody else didn't have to? It seemed like a no-brainer to me to get rid of the tolls. And so I suggested that, and we were going to do 50%. And then I woke up, I think it was a Sunday morning, and saw that the Liberals were going to do 50%. So I phoned up John and I said, let's just get rid of the tolls. I mean, let's not pussyfoot around here. Let's just get rid of the tolls. And he said, fine. He says, how are we going to pay for it? I said, leave that to me. I'll talk to our folks. We'll figure it out. And let's announce it this afternoon. So that's what we did.
That's what you call a TSN turning point right there.
Well, it's interesting, Bob, because it is like I'm hearing a lot of your outsider perspective being valuable there, right? It's that kind of like you come in with fresh eyes and you shake, like, let's shake our heads. What's this about? And took some bold positions.
Yeah, exactly. And again, how did that help? I think you got to look at elections and say the voters out there want something under the metaphor of the Christmas tree. They want something under there for them. It's not all about the politicians and I'm going to do this and these macro promises that means nothing to anybody. So when you say things like that are specific to people and to their lives, and they might talk and actually talk about it with their houses, it goes a long way in getting them to come over to your side. So
I want to unpack that decision on the tolls a little bit more, because it's what it reveals. It's behind the scenes. I find interesting that within your coalition on the center left, there would have been a lot of thinking about the positive aspects of road pricing and clamping down the automobile, and favoring transit. But here you are removing tolls from automobiles, and literally are removing a disincentive from people driving. So, which goes against the grain, of what the orthodoxy from the many voices in the center left was. So, to me, it seems to me like you had the type of authority and mandate from John Horgan that you could just go do it, right? That you didn't have to spend a lot of time processing, not spend a lot of time consulting with caucus or whatever. Is that how it worked? Did you have kind of a, not necessarily carte blanche, but a strong hand to make those calls?
I did. And it was one of the things I talked to John about before agreeing to do the job. That I wanted to be able to make decisions. Obviously, consulting with him, he's the leader, and telling the caucus what we were going to do, and getting their buy-in. You're quite right on the fact that people in the party, particularly people who were strong environmentalists, thought that this was not a thing to do. But when you sat down and talked to them and said, well, this isn't road pricing, this is two bridges that actually, I think they were P3s, but were getting paid for by the tolls. And that is not the same as road pricing. So why are we why are we going along with this? We're getting sucked in on this, and let's do something that actually helps people. And, you know, and the port man, like, actually, after we removed the tolls over the next couple of years, actually had more people on it, because people were not driving around and just thinking of the automobile. When you actually try to avoid the tolls, you drive a further distance. So I talked that through with folks after the decision, because the decision that we had to make was quite quick. And you know, our people, when we made it out in Surrey, you know, the people in Surrey were over the moon about it, because you know, they were the ones that were paying a lot of the tolls, and walked it through with our caucus and our folks on what we were doing. If you want to get into price fixing, well, let's talk about that. But this is what the tolls are, and it's not price fixing.
So let's take these bold moves and move, I think, now to the election and the 52 days after the election. Just to jog, I don't think I need to jog any memories of anyone on this call, but maybe for others. And you know, I was in Ontario at the time, right? But the results are 41 seats for the NDP, 43 seats for the Liberals, and 3 Green. Right. And in that time, you know, I know, Bob, you were critical to figuring out the path. You know, though, as Mike will remind us, Christie won the election, figuring out the path to the NDP forming government. And I'm wondering, I kind of want to like take that back to the moment you're realizing, like, this is the path forward. We're going to have to reach out to the Greens, and what you do to kind of figure about, like, what's your case there? What are you saying to them to try and build that relationship and make that possible?
Well, the first thing I did is election night, when we're standing around and nobody knew when anybody was going to speak, I said to John, phone Andrew Weaver. And so we phoned him. And Andrew was just, I don't know if you know Andrew, but he was just giddy about him getting elected, and looked like at that point, well, and they did elect 2 more Greens. And he said to us that night, John, at one point, I think we were at 42 or 43. It was bouncing back and forth. And then it went down to 40 or 41. And he said, John, we'll talk tomorrow, or talk in the next couple of days. You have more work to do. Go back and get more votes. And so that was the start of it, though, building that relationship with Andrew right from the start.
Which wasn't in a good place to begin with.
Yeah.
No, exactly. It was not in a good place to begin with. He was really pissed with us because we went after him pretty strongly on the island. And targeted, you know, we ended up losing the seat in Saanich and the Islands. And but it was something that I think we had to do. I said to John, you've got to do that, because there's an opportunity here with the things the way they are. Nobody has a mandate at this point. And of course, we had to wait a couple of weeks to have all the votes counted. But on election night, we had Courtney Comox by 9 votes. And you know, it was one of our seats. So so we had to wait those couple of weeks to find out what the final results were. In the meantime, I had reached out to the Green Party to see who was it we could speak to, and I ended up talking to the woman that was in charge of their policy, and so we started chatting and waiting for the results to come in. And I think I had a preliminary meeting with her in the Grand Pacific in a room off the manager's room, because they had no rooms available. And we wanted to have a private conversation. And they wanted me to come over to Victoria, so I did. And we had this room where we chatted, and made no promises, but decided that we could get together. And I said we should probably have 4 from each side to talk about what we could do if when the votes come in and the Liberals don't have a majority, how we could actually have you become part of our team or support us in the legislature. So that was sort of the preliminary stuff, and then we started getting together and meeting. I think we had 4 or 5 meetings, yeah. And it didn't get serious until the actual vote was in. Because if we'd lost Courtney Comox, the Liberals would have formed the government.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Was there ever a moment in that process where were you always confident you were going to get to the finish line on, I think it was June 29th, or were there ever a moment
Oh,
there where you were,
there were lots of moments.
yeah,
Yeah, because it was it was razor thin. And when we met with the Greens, it was, they were wanting this and wanting that, and we didn't really know where they stand. And they were meeting with the Liberals too. And
yeah,
actually on I think the Sunday when we actually convinced them, and this is after the results were all in, we on the Saturday, I think the Friday or Saturday, I can't remember which day it was, we had a meeting, and I picked up from that meeting that I didn't think, and I was talking with Carol James, who was on the committee with us, and Marie Delamatia and John, and said, I think these guys are listening to the Liberals, the way they're talking. And I said, John, you got to come in the next meeting and be strong and just say, we're going to walk away. This is not going to happen. And so we walked in on the Sunday, and John did his thing, and we were going to get up and leave. And Sonia spoke up, and she was on the other team, and she said, oh, you guys are way off base. We really want to support you. We're not going to support the Liberals. And that just threw us back. Like, okay, great. And then we started working on the terms of reference on what a deal would look like. And we worked through that for the next week. But it was trying to get that signed off and done. And one of the big benefits of having that deal was when we got into government, we had a program that we had to deliver on, because we wouldn't have our support without them. And I told the caucus, and we worked with the caucus, saying that if, there were days where they said, well, no, we're not going to do this. The Greens want this, but we don't have to do everything they say. I said, and we'd say it's in the agreement. And Geoff Meggs was involved in this too. And Geoff would say, it's involved in the agreement, we're doing it. So it gave us some discipline that you don't normally have when you go in. And it also gave us a roadmap to do a whole bunch of things that we did in 3 years that were pretty remarkable to do that much in that short a time.
and I understand you carried that kind of relationship into government with you and helped manage that process. But pretty early on in, well, I guess 2.5 years maybe into your term, government was throwing a major curveball, which was COVID.
Mm-hmm.
And which challenged governments all over the world, but especially here in Canada too.
Yeah.
Interested in your insights on how the Premier and yourself as the senior advisor faced that challenge, and how you found your way forward, because BC did get pretty high marks in terms of receiving public support for how it managed the through the crisis.
And that's one of the things, that was one of the great attributes John had, is that he didn't try to be everything to everybody. He let his ministers work for him. He always knew what was going on, and they always reported in, but he gave them something, he really trusted them to do stuff. And that came with COVID too. When Adrian Dix came in and started talking about COVID, and Adrian had been talking about it in January, February. Something's coming. We don't know what it is, but it's really bad. And we had this big protest going on with First Nations around LNG at the time in February. Actually, our speech from the throne almost got shut down because of the protest around the legislature. So we were all consumed with that. Then all of a sudden March happens, and it's COVID. And the first thing that John said is, who's the public health person that we need to talk to? And it was Bonnie Henry. She should be in charge, along with Adrian, doing that. And he took a back seat to that, and he let them go out and do it. And that was all a purpose, because he said, I don't know anything about it. Like, I know about health and stuff, but I'm not an expert on this. We need the experts to do this. And so he agreed right from the start that that's who would be in charge. And he would come out, maybe once a week or so, to make sure that people knew he was there and that he was backing them up. But it was a real, we all think back to the stories of when it first started. Nobody knew what was going on, and people were frightened. And so to have somebody up there like Dr. Bonnie Henry, who reassured people in a way that what we're doing is going to help everybody, and we're all in this together, was really a turning point for us in dealing with COVID.
Yeah, but that really was the state, right? No one knew what was going on. And I think when you add to that the decision of whether to call an election and how a government would wear that was something that was really hard to know.
Yes.
And so I want to go back then, as you're moving into 2020, and you've clearly got a window. There's an opportunity that's emerged in this moment because the government is very popular. There's a timing question. I understand you were pretty intimately involved in, of a question of when to call it. And it's funny, I was thinking about this one, like timing is everything and there's no clock. You did, right?
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what went into making that call.
Well, probably in, I think, June or July that year, we were looking at, the numbers were astronomical for us going up, and incumbency, and most incumbent governments were doing okay, but ours were just off the chart. John became, in all these best premier polls across the country. John was like leading that, and we'd never done that. And being the strategist I am, I said, let's call an election, just sort of tongue in cheek. And John said, how would we do that? I said, let me put something together and how we would do it. And so we started working on it. And of course, I was talking to, Adrian Dix and Bonnie Henry about what we could do and what we couldn't do, and whether or not it would be safe to do it. And they gave us the go-ahead that it would be safe to do it with some precautions, just the same precautions we were taking in our day-to-day lives about it. And you got to remember, there's no vaccines at this point. And so what we were, and the other thing that people were telling us, like the experts, that this was not going to be short-term COVID. It's going to be there, and because we had an election scheduled for the following year. So so whenever we had an election, it was probably going to be a COVID election. And you've got to remember here what had happened with the Greens. Andrew Weaver had stepped down and as leader, and he was actually talking about not publicly, but talking to me and a couple of other people of going back to university to teach, and they might do it in the fall, and that might trigger a by-election. And if that triggered a by-election, where were we going to be? We'd have to win it or the Greens would have to win it. One of us would have to win it in order to keep things going. And so that would be something that we had no control of. What we did have control over is calling the election. And we had completed most of the what we agreed to with the Greens. Either things were completed or they were being done. And so that agenda was starting to be finished. So minority governments usually don't last a long time. We were into our third year, and by the time it called the election, it was 3.5 years. So we made a decision that, and talking with Adrian and Dr. Henry, is to do it in October, because they were worried about any time after that, we're all going inside again, and that the virus might spread. So do it before that, and you have a window here to do it. So working with John and a couple of other folks, we finally made the decision in September and called the election. And let me tell you, that was a tough decision, because we didn't know where it was going to go. But we thought that it was the right decision to make, not knowing what could happen in a year from now. We knew what was going on right now.
Did it factor into your thinking that you wanted to have that election against Andrew Wilkinson, as opposed to potential leadership change could have happened a year later?
I'll put it this way: Andrew was not as strong as Christie, so we thought that would be to our advantage, and he was, he had never run
the matchup you wanted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So it was a matchup we wanted, and we thought that going in, and we had to make some conditions. One of the conditions we made with our folks is there would be no canvassing. And talking to a Democrat about not canvassing is like, that's pretty strong stuff. And we were very stringent. We were really strict about that. If we found somebody that was actually doing that, we talked to them and stop it, because we really wanted to portray that, yes, this is a COVID election, but we're taking precautions for it, and we're taking this very seriously.
And you did end up, like, that decision I'm trying to remember like how long it lasted in the news cycle, but days anyway, maybe a
Yeah.
little bit more.
Yeah.
I'm wondering how you were feeling when that blowback came and whether it ended up being sort of what you'd expected, different in any way.
I told people that we were going to get the shit kicked out of us for the first couple of days on calling the election. And it was going to be by the pundits, it's going to be by the media, it's going to be by the opposition parties, but it wasn't going to be by the voters. And so it was going to be 2 or 3 days. The voters were all concerned about COVID, and they could give a damn whether people were calling an election or having an election or doing anything like that at that point. And I said, we had to weather that storm, you guys. And if once we do that, then we can start talking to people about what we want to do in the next 4 years and what we want to do as far as COVID is concerned. And
Sounds like Pierre Poilievre was taking notes. Mainstream media there.
Well, but the other thing that happened is we started to think, put out stuff and put out our platform and started talking about that, and people didn't really care. So I put up a note and had everybody put up a note, and it goes back to the Clinton campaign. It's the pandemic, stupid.
Yeah.
And remember, that's the lens that we had for everything. So after about the first week of the campaign, that became our theme. It's, and that's when we got into, the fact that we're going to have mail-in ballots. We had a whole campaign on that. So we wanted to make sure that people were thinking about that when we're out going campaigning and how we were going to do it.
So you were very successful in taking let's call him originally a hot-headed leader like John Horgan, and helping cool him down a little bit and not sacrifice his relatability, but bring a new tone for him, and proved to be pretty successful. Looking ahead to Premier Eby, what's your advice to him? Like, what's your, he seems to be doing pretty well in the polls right now, but he has a different style, he has a different approach, a different demeanor. How do you size him up?
I think, first and foremost, I think he's doing a terrific job right now. I think people are knowing David from before, when he was AG and when he was working in different files, and he did a lot of stuff in our first term and part of the second term, and was always front and center. But David was always serious in getting things done. And when he became leader, a whole new David came out. On the fact that he actually, got out there and talked to people, not in the same way John did. I mean, they're different people, but in a very, you could tell he's listening to people, and when he talks about folks and everything, he tells stories. I think that's the most important thing about politics, is to tell stories about what's going on out there. And David has been able to do that, talking about what's going on. And when a push comes to shove on issues like what he said last week on, I think it was a response to John Rustad, bring something in the House about this parental rights stuff and SOGI and everything, and David just got up and just said, we're not bringing this to British Columbia, just nonstop. And the way I would ask people to actually look at it, just type it in, David Eby talking to John Rustad on his response, because it was charming and what he started off, and it was so decisive on what he was saying about what British Columbia we want. And I think that David is he hasn't won anything yet. David knows that this next election will be the election that he has to do, and he's taking all the steps that he has to make sure he'll be successful.
So if he's on the podium on election night doing a concession speech, how did that happen?
Well, that had happened is if we ran a terrible campaign. And I think, right now it's, where it is. Look, the race is going to tighten up. All these polls that you see right now, where, the NDP is in the mid 40s and the Conservatives have bounced back. I saw one poll where the Conservatives were ahead. By the way, Leger does not put party leaders' names in when they ask for the vote intention. So I think there's a Poilievre thing going on there when he was advertising all summer And every time anybody turned on their phone or their television, there was a guy with no glasses on saying, "I'm Pierre Poilievre with kids." It was just, they've tried to warm him up, and that's everywhere with people. And the Trudeau government is, going through the stages of what happens when a government's been in for a while. So I think that the polls provincially, I think, will tighten up. I think Kevin Falcon is not Andrew Wilkinson, and he's got a bit of fire in his belly. So I think that they will tighten up. But I think David Eby is got his eye on what British Columbians are thinking about, and affordability, housing, and healthcare are three things that everybody talks about. Well, we're not going to solve them all overnight, but you got to keep your feet moving, showing that you're taking steps on it. And that's what I think David recognizes, and he's continuing to do that.
So talking about political brands, we're talking to you, Bob, from Manitoba. So I can't miss an opportunity to talk about one of the more interesting and emerging political brands in Wab Kinew. There was a pretty serious push during the campaign to paint Wab Kinew as a criminal with a delinquent past. And then on election night, he shows up as this leader making history, delivering this really optimistic victory speech. Can you tell us, just what you're looking ahead to in Wab Kinew's leadership and what you're watching for as his premiership unfolds?
I think first of all, I think it's really exciting. And Wab is like one of the best political communicators I've ever met. He's a great communicator, and as you referenced on election night, what he said out there, and he knows the moment. He knows the moment, and he can read people and when he talks to them. But he's also about the voters, and if you hear him talk, he's really, I know inside he's very proud of what he's accomplished, particularly as a First Nations man. But he wants to be the best premier he can be, and he talks about that all the time. He survived all these attacks. I ran his campaign in 2019 here, and we ran it. We didn't have a lot of money. We ran it on a shoestring budget and a lot of duct tape. And they went after him like crazy in that campaign, like just visceral attacks on him from Brian Pallister and his gang. And he survived all that and was able to, get 6 more seats and then move on to opposition. And it was his caucus. And then for the last 4 years, he's just been determined to talk about the things that people cared about in their homes. And he's done that. And now the proof will be in what he can, accomplish, because, they ran on healthcare. Healthcare is a real mess here. I know it's a mess across the country, but the Tories before COVID had cut back in healthcare. And so, of course, when COVID hit, it was even worse. And so, and it never really recovered from that. So he's got he's got to really address that, but I know he will. And he also suffers a bit from sort of the Obama stuff, because Obama, when he got elected, it was just there's so much hope and positivity going forward. And then you have to do government. And what did Obama get? The worst recession, the financial crisis that we've never seen before in 2008. He had to deal with that right off the bat. And that becomes reality. Wab will have the same thing going forward, dealing with the realities of government. Now that you're in, you have the tough decisions to make. And I think he's up for the task. I think he will do that. He's very thoughtful.
I hope we can find an excuse down the road to have you back on Hotel Pacifico, Bob, to talk about that, check you in again. But yeah. I do want to thank you for being our first guest at the Hotel Pacifico. Yeah.
I learned today that you and I faced off against each other in Dooney in 1986. So
yes,
that was
I didn't know that either.
I didn't know our road would lead to Hotel Pacifico many years later. But thanks a lot for joining us. We really appreciate you checking in here.
Okay, much appreciated, and good luck. This is going to be a great podcast. So good luck to you guys.
Thank you very much.
Anytime you want me back, I'd love to come back.
I moved to BC 4 years ago from Ontario. And one of the things I've come to appreciate is all the small ways we do things differently here. The way us locals show that we're local, that we are of BC. Some things are obvious, like the way we embrace rain gear and how grown men and women wear adult-sized splash pants to the office. It rains here all the time, but we don't complain about the weather. We complain about ferry delays and the lineups at Seventh Heaven. Sometimes it's more subtle, more values-based, like how we embrace mountain views, but not always the advice of dentists to put fluoride in the drinking water. And milk comes in a plastic jug or carton, not a plastic bag. That's too Ontario, like the Maple Leafs and Drake. From the very beginning, Hotel Pacifico's presenting sponsor, Talis, has been of and for BC. 20 years ago, their first office in the Brian Canfield Centre in Burnaby was affectionately known as the Boot, an obvious reference to a Blundstone, and Talis has stayed true to their BC roots and commitment to community ever since. It shows up in things like the $18.5 billion investments in network infrastructure, operations, and spectrum Talis has committed across BC over just the next 3 years. After years of supporting reforestation efforts, Talis just planted their 1 millionth tree. That's a total equivalent of 20,000 acres of forest, or an area 20 times the size of Vancouver's Stanley Park. When British Columbians partner with Talis, that is an investment that comes back to our communities through jobs, infrastructure, community giving, and government revenue. When Talis wins, BC wins, because we're all in this together. Even Drake. Maybe we should send him some splash pants.
Hello. You've reached the Hotel Pacifico Strategy Suite.
So I wanted to start with you, Geoff. I'm curious from your perspective why this is happening now, that the government is choosing this moment to crack down on short-term rental platforms.
Well, I think that it's a really important move, probably the most substantive one that has been made on the housing front in a number of years since the vacancy tax, because it actually has the prospect of opening up vacancies right away in existing places that students can rent, that other renters can rent. There's allegedly 16,000 long-term vacancies out there, which if even half were put into the long-term rental market could have an important impact on vacancy rates. So this is a really important initiative. Why now and not earlier? I think the public's gone a long way down the road of being critical of some of these so-called disruptive platforms like Uber, DoorDash, you name it, and Airbnb, and some of its competitors, and realizing what a number of municipal leaders were saying even 6-7 years ago, which is that this is having a really damaging impact in small markets, particularly small university towns and so on. It's not an issue in places that sort of built around the model like Whistler. So they're doing it now because they need to find some new ways to move some units into the hands of British Columbians, and this is going to achieve that. I think the fact that it's so broadly supported at the municipal sector is important, and that's why you don't see very much complaining from the BC United front bench about this legislation. It's gone to second reading, and they make some amendments, but they're not making it a centerpiece of their attack on the government. So it's a very popular thing.
Yeah, I want to stay with this a bit because I think it is interesting. Like, to your point, housing's been an issue for a long time. The availability, particularly of rentals, has been around for a while. I'm wondering how much, what's shifted maybe a bit more recently is how we view some of these disruptive digital innovation platforms. And I'm thinking too, like, would this have been received as well, let's say a year or two ago, before before some of the more recent, news around, say, X and Elon Musk's takeover there? Do you think it would have worked? I think it had to be now.
Well, I think part of what happened is that some myth busting happened as a result of research done by people at McGill and elsewhere who said, this is not my neighbor who's staying in the top floor while students spend a night or two downstairs. There's a clear concentration of ownership and the acquisition of units for the purpose of short-term rental. And what was sort of in the public mind as a reality was documented in some of this research, which the government keeps pointing to. So I think there were a couple of things that happened there, but the seriousness of the problems in the rental market became really acute as well. And so you see people now prepared to kick over zoning citywide in some of our cities, deregulated basically with I think some questionable, problematic consequences down the road perhaps, but there's public support for that there wouldn't have been at all a little while ago. And that's true in the rental market too. And the nice thing for the government is that they have an enemy a definable, visible enemy in terms of some of these landlords who have purchased units and are now complaining to a chorus of violins, that they're going to maybe lose some money when they dump their units. That's music to the ears of tenants who hope to rent those places, but also it's a great sign that the government's hitting the right note.
Yeah, I would say they really lifted the curtain at the same time. And it's not sort of like some person struggling to afford their mortgage, getting a little bit of extra income off of their basement suite or a laneway suite. It turned out to be a lot more of people investing. And I think the stat from the McGill study was something like the 50% of profits coming from the top 10% of investors. Mike, I'm wondering what you think, in terms of sort of, will this play well with voters? I think we can all say, particularly in this moment in time, it seems to be, but how does this age?
Well, I think the government's behind on this with voters. And, this is similar to Christy Clark's government in around about 2015, 2016, when they brought in the foreign buyers tax, where they took action in a way that had never been done before. But the voters were already there for it. Like, the voters were waiting for action. And that tax proved to be a lot less contentious than I think government was expecting it to be at that time. And I think the Airbnb thing probably could have been brought in earlier. When you look at the stats of, take Vancouver, for example, 40% of the units are rentals, and there's a 1% vacancy rate at any given time. That's not actually a lot of units that are vacant at any given time in the city of Vancouver. So if you take available units out and put them in the Airbnb supply, that I think is making a material impact on the vacancy rate. So if hopefully for renters, this legislation would make a mathematical difference and therefore ease rents and improve vacancies. But we'll have to see. The point is that there's a huge appetite for action on housing across the board. NIMBY voices are giving way to YIMBY voices. There's a lot less tolerance for the type of political conversation that used to be there not that long ago that governments would cater to. And now it's like, no, we just want more supply.
Well, I wonder though, I think there's an interesting, so there's an excellent advantage in this, in that I think it lends tangibility to an issue that has been at the fore for voters for a long time, and any solutions have struggled with that tangibility piece. I think it's really beautiful in that way. And probably I think it's part of why it's been so talked about, compared to how many other housing announcements backed by how many billions of dollars we've seen, right? So I think definitely a win there. There's an interesting question though, Mike, I think, and why I was asking particularly in the vein of aging, is that sort of that math, that's that political strategist math of, you're going to have people who hate this. You're going to have people who plan their retirement on this, who, are going to lose out for these changes, who are going to be activated to oppose this government. And I think the flip side of that is yet to be seen. I mean, what do you think the prospects are for the Eby government kind of long term to be able to paint this as part of a tableau and a portrait of a sort of authenticity on, let's say, housing, or even more broadly, affordability?
I don't think the Airbnb thing is going to motivate a significant political opposition that's going to, because I don't know where its home is. Like, as Geoff noted, I don't think BC United's going to take the side of the Airbnb businesses, and neither of the Greens. Like, they have nowhere to go. But the housing outlook generally, and what are the results? Are prices still going to be high? Are rents still going to be high? Or vacancies low? That's the end result that people care about. And because I'm a geek, I looked at the quarterly report the other day from the BC government. And there, buried in the details, is a forecast for housing starts in the next couple of years, and they're going to go down. Now they've gone up, and I know some people would say, no, last year was really high compared to the historical norms. Well, that's true, but they're going down again, and that, to me, that goes against the grain of what we're hearing in the political discussion, is that we're trying to drive more supply. Now, maybe the Ministry of Finance is going to take a wait and see approach when they do those forecasts, but the fact is, high interest rates, slowing economy means it's tougher for the private sector to get units on the street. So
but that
reality is going to catch up.
It's a fascinating thing though, Mike, that you cannot order the private sector to lose money. And housing policy has been largely driven, I would say, under the administration you worked for and the one I did, by the demands of the development community to strip away red tape and so on. And they're not showing up because they're afraid they might lose some money.
Mm.
And so I think this poses a really fundamental question for policymakers and political people, because it's, we're going to need more public sector intervention, apparently, to get those starts higher. And I'm not sure what that looks like, but I think you put your finger on a really important point.
That's what I was going to say, Geoff. Do you think that those slowing housing starts are something that could come back to bite?
I don't, well, it depends on whether people are prepared to call a spade a spade. There's, like, recently said by the city staff here in Vancouver that 900 units have been approved that have not been built for the reasons that Mike points to. And so if the government's prepared to pretend that's not the case and that it's their fault, then I think it will be a problem. The issue here is that, Richard Stewart, the mayor of Coquitlam, famously said, you can impose a deadline. It's famous to me anyway. You can order me to make a decision in 24 hours. I can say no that quickly. That's the other part of these targets and so forth the government's imposing. So it's going through the playbook that key people have proposed to the government. The thing about Airbnb is that it's practical, quick, and I think the nice thing about it politically is that there are these visible faces who everybody can be angry about, which was also the case briefly with the vacancy tax. A very, very small proportion of the population was furious about the vacancy tax, but it was helpful that they were from a political perspective because the public could see something happening, even if they weren't sure it was going to help them directly.
So I want to move from this into actually predictions going forward. And I'm going to say, I want to make a prediction to say we're probably going to talk about this again at Hotel Pacifico. So guess, prediction. Yeah, look forward to that at some future check-in. Let's go into less safe predictions, though, because I do want to talk about, we're kind of on a clock for about a year out from another election. And I'd love to hear from both of you a bit of what you think might be ahead in that year that could trip up Premier Eby. I'll start with you, Mike, because I think just, leaning on some of your expertise in polling, I'm wondering particularly what you're seeing that could activate in sort of the political map and more regional aspects that could be something that could spell some trouble for someone who otherwise at this point looks like, well, say Adrian Dix over 10 years ago.
Well, nobody better kick any dogs in the meantime. But I think the psychology of it's really important right now. And right now, the psychology of it is that a year out, Eby looks invincible, and BC United looks like they're in a tailspin, and Conservatives are eating their lunch, with the federal Conservative voters. So no one can see a way out for BC United to get to a competitive race. But as Bob Dewar was saying earlier, he was in much the same position a year before the 2017 election, just as Christie was a year before the 2013 election. Things tighten up, elections are unpredictable. So there's always that. But right now, the BC United has to battle through the psychology of feeling like they don't have a chance, at least some of the supporters. And the NDP are going to have to be very careful about not getting overconfident and making stupid mistakes because they think they're not going to be held to account for it. And in both sides of that are challenging.
Geoff, actually, that's the perfect way to segue to you, because I love to hear you pick up on that kind of risk of overconfidence.
Bob made great comments as usual, but I think he understated to some extent the psychological impact that his arrival had and the leadership he provided in the NDP and the support he gave John that was very striking to people like me and the secondary leadership and non-staff, so forth. There became a decision to try to win as opposed to sitting around licking our wounds about losing. I think that's exactly what Mike's pointing to in terms of the problems facing Kevin Falcon, because there's not a long history of feeling like losers in that group. So sometimes it's more disorienting if it's a new experience than if you've been doing it for a while. But you asked me about Eby, and I think Bob pointed to that as well. And Horgan used to make this comment all the time, was attributed to Harold Macmillan, a one-time British prime minister, that the main opposition was events, my boy, events. My dear boy, events. So it's the stuff you don't know that's about to happen and how you manage it that is critical. And the pandemic was one of those, and Horgan's approval was good after that. Many others struggled with it, but then came through fine. So there's undoubtedly these days something like that lurking. There seems to be some new catastrophe around the corner for some level of government almost every 24 hours these days. And I think that is the that is the tricky part. Having said that, I think David Eby's demonstrated a lot of determination and willingness to go in and try to fix things and take some quick steps. So we see that a little bit in the Surrey policing thing, where there's an effort to say that, well, Eby opened the door to more discussions with the mayor and so on. But we've got legislation in the House right now to fix Surrey policing, to deal with the risk of climate change, destructive impact of destroying dikes, atmospheric rivers, and so on. So we have an activist and very responsive leadership here with Eby, and he'll go quickly. Is he going to make a mistake? I can't rule it out. The huge Greenbelt fiasco that Doug Ford just had, sort of indicative, because to everybody's surprise, Ford has apologized. Apparently the public's forgiven him. There's lessons there for people too. Knowing when you've made a big boo-boo is critical in politics.
Well, I mean, in fairness, I think it did take Doug Ford he did take some time in realizing his boo-boo.
Oh yeah, he'll suffer for it, but apparently, he can live to fight another day.
Apparently, yeah.
Let's raise a glass or take a shot. Time to raid the minibar.
My toast is to Mayor Michael Hurley of Burnaby, which is one of the largest cities in the province, who is now leading his council through a discussion about creating a housing corporation for the city of Burnaby, which I think is going to be a really great thing to help actually acquire land and build housing that has more affordability. And it's a stark contrast to the many years in which the Burnaby Council under Derek Horgan absolutely refused to do anything about housing. And I think rental stock in particular paid a price. And credit to Daniel Tetro, a young councillor in the new wave there in Burnaby, who's really shown a lot of leadership on this file. So good for them. I think that's a good step forward for Burnaby and a good example to others.
All right. Thanks, Geoff. Mike.
I'm going to take a shot. Premier Eby, you've talked a lot about reducing permitting and red tape, admirably, in terms of the resource sector and housing. But I think you should pay a visit to the village of Lytton. They had a protest last week where they're 2.5 years and they still don't have shovels in the ground, and they're beset by red tape there, which is a very complicated situation. But I think this is a special situation where the leader of the province should dial into it and help them out of a very bad situation. So get up to Lytton.
Thanks, Mike. So I'm going to cheat. I'm going to take a shot and raise a glass. Excellent. Actually, it's not cheating because there are no rules, so I can do what I want. Yeah, great. So I'll start by, my shot would be, actually, I do just want to take a minute, and my shot would be the Richmond RCMP and the ad they put out about I'm going to say safe pedestrian collisions and keeping roads safe. And the call out I want to make is that it made a false equivalency about drivers and pedestrians, and we are seeing more pedestrian deaths. And I think we need to be really careful when we have this discussion. I come from the province and the city where the mayor coined the term war against the car. I get very worried when we engage in false equivalency when we're talking about drivers and pedestrians. And then I'm going to raise a glass because, speaking of road safety, Vancouver City Council recently approved what will be Vancouver's first scramble. And I got to say, you have not lived until you have walked across a major intersection on the diagonal. And it is, the wind in your hair as you make that progression is a joy. I'm sorry it came too late for you, Mike McDonald. But I look forward to the rest of us getting to make that journey. I believe it's at Granville and Robson.
We call it Robson here in Vancouver.
Oh, I was set myself up for a burn, didn't I? Look
well,
forward
Kate,
to
if you're going to drink twice as much of the minibar, you're not going to make it through these episodes in very good shape here. Geoff and I are the sober second thought for sure.
I was going to say, I established myself as the
Party
lush
girl
at the bar. Yeah.
I guess that's my cue to say thanks everyone for joining us here at the inaugural episode of Hotel Pacifico. We'd like to thank our presenting sponsor, Talis, for helping to make this a pleasant stay for all of our guests. We hope you'll be back next week. We'll be waiting for you at the front desk.
Check out time at Hotel Pacifico. We hope you enjoyed your stay.